He stood frozen in the school hallway when his son asked in a voice too small for such a heavy question, "Dad, am I the reason Mom never came back?" In that moment, this single father realized that no amount of packed lunches, bedtime stories, or silent sacrifices could shield a child from loneliness. For 3 years, he had built his life around routines designed to survive, not to feel. Mornings were rushed, nights were quiet, and everything in between was measured by how well he could keep his son smiling. He told himself that love was dangerous, that hope was a luxury meant for people who hadn't already lost too much. To the outside world, he was strong, dependable, and composed, the kind of man people admired from a distance. But behind closed doors, exhaustion sat beside him like an uninvited guest, reminding him that doing everything alone comes at a cost. He didn't dream about romance anymore, and he certainly didn't imagine building a new family. All he wanted was to be enough for his child. Yet the hardest truth he avoided was this: children don't just need protection, they need connection. Every unanswered question from his son chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. He believed that letting someone new into their lives would only risk another goodbye. What he didn't know was that sometimes the most powerful changes begin quietly, without grand gestures or promises. Sometimes healing starts when someone chooses to stay, not because it's easy, but because it matters. This is not a story about finding love when everything is perfect. It's a story about a single dad who learns that strength isn't found in standing alone, but in allowing space for something more. He used to think exhaustion was something you could sleep off. That belief died sometime during the second year of raising his son alone, when fatigue stopped being physical and settled somewhere deeper, heavier, permanent. Every morning began before the alarm. He would wake to the sound of small footsteps padding across the apartment floor, followed by the hesitant knock on his bedroom door. Not a loud knock. His son had learned early that loud noises startled people who were already tired. "Dad, I'm awake," he'd answer, even when he wasn't. The apartment was small, but it felt even smaller after she left. One bedroom for him, one for his son, and a living room that doubled as a dining area, a playroom, and sometimes a battlefield of toy cars and unfinished homework. The walls were painted a neutral beige, chosen because it felt safe. Nothing in the apartment took risks anymore. Neither did he. Breakfast was always rushed. He burned toast more often than he cared to admit, apologized too much for it, and pretended not to notice when his son quietly scraped off the blackened edges and ate the middle instead. They spoke in half sentences, both aware of the clock ticking toward school drop-off and work deadlines. "How's your spelling test today?" he'd ask. "Okay," his son would reply, eyes fixed on the table. That was usually where the conversation ended. Not because they had nothing to say, but because both of them were careful. His son had learned which questions made his father's smile tighten just a little, and he had learned to live with the guilt of not always having the answers. At school drop-off, he lingered longer than necessary. He watched his son merge into a crowd of children with two parents waiting nearby, laughing, arguing, negotiating snacks and weekend plans. He told himself not to compare. Comparison was a trap. But some mornings, the weight of being the only one standing alone pressed down on his chest until breathing felt deliberate. "Love you, Dad," his son said one morning, already half turned toward the building. "I love you more," he replied automatically. His son paused, frowned. "That's not fair." He smiled, because smiling was easy. "Life's not fair." He didn't realize until later how cruel that answer sounded. Work was supposed to be the easy part. He had a job that paid the bills, coworkers who respected him, and a boss who described him as reliable. Reliable was the word people used when they didn't know how else to describe a man who never said no and never asked for help. He ate lunch alone at his desk, not because he disliked his coworkers, but because joining them meant questions. Questions led to conversations, and conversations eventually drifted toward families, partners, weekend plans. He had learned how to deflect with polite vagueness. Oh, just spending time with my kid. Keeping things quiet. Nothing special. Nothing special became his shield. Evenings were the hardest. Once homework was done and dinner plates were cleared, silence crept in. His son filled some of it with cartoons or building blocks, narrating elaborate stories to himself. He filled the rest by cleaning the same already clean surfaces, as if order could compensate for what was missing. Bath time was when the questions slipped through. Warm water loosened things, muscles, thoughts, words. Dad? Yes? Why do some kids get picked up by their moms and dads? He paused, hands stilling on the towel. Families are different. Oh, a beat. Is ours broken? The word hit harder than he expected. Broken. He swallowed. No, it's just different. His son nodded, but didn't look convinced. Children accepted explanations easily, but they remembered the gaps. Later, as he tucked his son into bed, he read the same book for the third night in a row. His son liked repetition. It made things predictable. Predictability felt safe. Dad? Yes? Do you get lonely? The room went very quiet. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic outside. Sometimes, he admitted. Is that because of me? His chest tightened. He sat on the edge of the bed and chose his words carefully, as if they were fragile objects that might shatter if handled wrong. No, never because of you. But you're always tired. That one hurt because it was true. I'm tired because being your dad is a big job, he said, but it's the best job I have. His son studied his face with unsettling seriousness, as if filing away evidence for a conclusion he hadn't yet shared. Then he nodded and rolled onto his side, satisfied for now. After the door closed, he stood in the hallway longer than necessary, listening to his son's breathing. Even after it evened out, guilt crept in, uninvited and familiar. Guilt for every missed school event, every distracted answer, every moment when survival had taken precedence over presence. He used to think he was protecting his son by keeping their world small. Fewer people meant fewer goodbyes. Fewer attachments meant fewer losses. Love, he had learned, came with an expiration date. His own loss had taught him that. There had been a time when he believed in second chances and shared futures, in the idea that life expanded when you let people in. That version of him felt distant now, like someone he used to know. Friends had tried at first. Invitations to dinners, casual suggestions to get back out there. He declined politely, then less politely, until the invitation slowed and eventually stopped. I don't have time, he'd say. What he meant was, I don't have room. Room for disappointment. Room for his son to get attached to someone who might disappear. Room for himself to hope and fail again. So he shrank his world until it fit neatly around two people, him and his son. That was enough. It had to be. But cracks showed up in small ways, in the way his son hesitated before answering questions about his family, in the way he watched other children with an intensity that bordered on longing, in the questions that came out sideways, disguised as curiosity but rooted in absence. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, his son kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk, sending it skittering ahead of them. Dad? Yes? Do you think I'll be like you when I grow up? He smiled without thinking. I hope you'll be better. His son stopped walking. Why? He turned, surprised. Because every parent wants that. His son frowned, processing. But you're good. The words landed somewhere unexpected. He knelt to his son's level, hands resting on his knees. I try, he said honestly. That night, after his son fell asleep, he sat on the couch with the lights off. The TV flickered silently, forgotten. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen and wondered when trying had stopped feeling like enough. He didn't know it yet, but this was the quiet before change. Not the kind that arrives loudly, announced by dramatic events, but the kind that seeps in through unnoticed cracks. Because while he believed he had closed the door on something more, life had a way of testing such convictions. And soon, without warning, someone would step into his carefully contained world, not to fix it, not to save him, but to challenge the idea that he had to do all of this alone. And that thought, more than anything else, terrified him. The first time he noticed her, it wasn't because she spoke to him. It was because she knelt down. He had brought his son to the community library on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of place he relied on when the apartment walls felt too close. The children's section buzzed with soft chaos, pages turning, whispered arguments over picture books, the occasional laugh that escaped before being shushed. He stood near the shelves, scrolling through his phone with half his attention, while his son sat cross-legged on the carpet, lining up plastic dinosaurs with intense focus. That was when he saw a pair of sneakers stop in front of his son. Not adult shoes looming impatiently, not the hurried steps of someone passing by, but someone who slowed down, someone who matched his son's height by crouching. "That's a T-Rex," she said gently, pointing to the largest dinosaur. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" His son looked up, startled but curious. "Yeah, he's the boss." She smiled, not the polite smile adults used on children, but the kind that suggested she took that answer seriously. "Every good team needs a boss." He straightened immediately, alert. Instinct kicked in fast and sharp. He watched closely, assessing tone, distance, body language. She wasn't touching his son. She wasn't crowding him. She spoke softly, giving him space to respond or not. Still, something about it made his chest tighten. Most people talked around his son. They asked him questions meant for adults, then nodded politely when he answered, already distracted. This woman was different. She was present in a way that felt intentional. "What's his name?" she asked. "Rex," his son replied after a moment. "Like the king." "Of course," she said. "Kings should have good names." His son beamed. That was when she finally looked up and noticed him watching. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly, rising to her feet. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's fine," he replied a little too stiffly. "He likes dinosaurs." "I can tell," she said. "He's very serious about them." There was no apology in her voice now, no defensiveness, just an observation. She didn't linger, didn't try to extend the conversation. She simply nodded at his son once more and walked away, disappearing between the shelves. He told himself it was nothing, a harmless interaction. People were allowed to be kind. Still, his son talked about her the entire way home. She knew about dinosaurs, he said. She listened, he added later, as if that were a separate and equally important detail. That night, while brushing his teeth, he caught himself wondering who she was. He didn't like that. Curiosity was a crack, and cracks let things in. The second time they met was not accidental. He recognized her voice before he saw her. "Hey," she said warmly, "you're back." His son turned before he could stop him. "You're the dinosaur lady." She laughed, a sound that carried easily. "I guess I am now." He sighed inwardly, but nodded politely. "Hi." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make him remember me like that," she said, though she didn't look sorry. She looked amused. "I'm a volunteer here on weekends, mostly with kids who need extra reading help." Something in that sentence lodged itself in his mind. Kids who need extra help. Not said with pity. Just fact. His son tugged on his sleeve. "She reads good." "She reads well," he corrected automatically, then winced. "Sorry." She smiled again. "It's okay. Grammar dads are important too." That earned her a sideways glance. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said lightly. "You care." He didn't respond to that. Over the next few weeks, she became a background presence. Not intrusive, not persistent. She didn't ask him out, didn't linger near him unnecessarily. She showed up where she was supposed to be, reading circles, library events, the occasional school fundraiser where she volunteered to organize books or supervise crafts. And every time she noticed his son, she remembered his name. She remembered that he didn't like loud noises. She noticed when he hovered at the edges of groups instead of joining in. One afternoon, during a school open house, he found his son sitting beside her at a table covered in crayons and construction paper. She wasn't directing him. She was following his lead, asking questions about the shapes he drew, the story he was clearly building in his head. "You don't have to stay," she told him when she noticed him watching again. "He's explaining something important." His son nodded solemnly. "It's a map." "A map to where?" she asked. "To home," his son said. Then quieter, "A bigger one." His chest tightened so suddenly it took him by surprise. That night he lay awake longer than usual, not because of memories, but because of questions. Who was she to his son, and why did that question matter so much? He started noticing his own reactions, the way his shoulders tensed when she was near, not with fear but with vigilance, the way he watched his son watch her. Children were honest in ways adults weren't. His son didn't guard his affection, he gave it where he felt safe. That terrified him. One evening, as they walked home together after a library event, his son skipped ahead, humming to himself. "Dad?" "Yes." "Is she your friend?" He hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "She listens," his son said simply. "Like you." The comparison caught him off guard. "I'm always listening," he said. "I know," his son replied, "but she listens differently." He didn't know what to do with that. A week later, she approached him directly for the first time. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, standing beside him. As their kids, hers were borrowed, his was not, played nearby. "But I wanted to ask if he's okay." He frowned. "Okay, how?" "He's very thoughtful," she said carefully. "Sometimes kids who are very thoughtful carry things they don't know how to say." Defensiveness flared instantly. "I take care of him?" "I know," she had said quickly, "and I wasn't questioning that. I just notice things. It's kind of my thing." He exhaled slowly. "He's fine." She nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. "If you ever want resources or just someone to talk to, I'm good," he interrupted. She didn't push. She never did. That night, his son cried in his sleep. He found him curled tight in his bed, breathing uneven, whispering something he couldn't quite make out. "Dad," his son murmured when he woke. "Don't go." "I'm here," he said immediately, gathering him close. "I'm not going anywhere." But the words felt heavier than before. For the first time, he wondered if staying wasn't enough, if being present didn't automatically mean being sufficient. He wondered if his son needed something he couldn't give alone. The thought filled him with guilt and anger and fear, all tangled together. And somewhere in that mess was the image of a woman who knelt down instead of towering over a child, who listened without fixing, who stayed without demanding. He told himself again that he didn't need help, but the truth was already settling in. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of what her presence revealed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, slicing through his workday with surgical precision. "Mr. Carter?" the school counselor asked, her voice calm in a way that immediately made his stomach drop. "Your son had an incident today. He's not hurt, but we think you should come." He didn't remember the drive. Later, he would recall fragments. The red light he barely stopped at, the way his hands shook on the steering wheel, the sudden irrational certainty that he had failed some unseen test. When he arrived, his son sat in a small office, feet dangling above the floor, eyes fixed on the carpet. "What happened?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay steady. His son shrugged. "I didn't want to go outside," the counselor explained gently. "Recess. A group of boys. A comment made too loudly, too carelessly. Where's your mom?" A laugh, not cruel exactly, just curious, in the careless way children sometimes are. His son hadn't cried. He had simply sat down and refused to move. "He said he felt tired," the counselor said, "emotionally tired." That phrase followed him home like a shadow. That night his son barely ate, pushed his food around the plate, quiet in a way that felt heavier than tantrums or tears. After dinner, he disappeared into his room without being asked. He stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the sink, and felt something inside him crack. Later, when he checked on his son, he found him curled on his bed, clutching a stuffed animal he hadn't used in years. "Dad?" his son asked without looking up. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said immediately, sitting down beside him. "You didn't do anything wrong. But the teacher said I should talk to someone. That doesn't mean you're in trouble. Then why do I feel bad?" He didn't have an answer. That was the moment the fear took shape. Not sharp, not dramatic, but slow and suffocating. What if love wasn't enough? He had believed that being present, being consistent, being careful was all his son needed. But what if it wasn't? What if there were gaps he couldn't fill no matter how hard he tried? That night, after his son finally slept, he sat on the bathroom floor and pressed his palms into his eyes until stars burst behind them. He didn't cry. He didn't know how anymore. But the weight sat in his chest, heavy and immovable. The next few weeks were worse. His son became quieter, not withdrawn exactly, but watchful. He hesitated before answering questions, flinched at raised voices, clung to him a little too tightly at drop-off. Teachers described him as well-behaved, in that careful tone adults used when they meant concerned. At home, the questions changed. "Do you think Mom would have liked my drawing? Do you think things would be easier if there were two of you?" He answered as best he could, but each question chipped away at the illusion he'd built, that he could be everything. The woman noticed before he said anything. He found her one afternoon in the school hallway, kneeling beside a bulletin board with a stack of papers in her hands. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and frowned slightly. "Hey," she said, "is he okay?" He stiffened. "Why do you keep asking that?" She stood slowly, careful not to crowd him, because he stopped talking about dinosaurs. The words hit harder than they should have. "He used to tell me stories every time he saw me," she continued. "Big ones, complicated ones. Lately he just smiles and says he's fine." He crossed his arms. "Kids go through phases." "Yes," she said gently, "but silence isn't a phase. It's usually a signal." Anger flared, not at her, at himself. "What do you want me to do?" he snapped. "Unmagically give him a different life?" She didn't react the way he expected. No defensiveness, no retreat. "I want you to stop carrying this alone," she said quietly. That night, his son had a panic attack. It came out of nowhere. A sudden sob, breath hitching, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. "I can't breathe," his son cried. "Dad, I can't." He dropped to the floor with him, heart pounding, trying to remember what the counselor had once said about grounding, about breathing together. His own breath felt too loud, too fast. "You're okay," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "You're safe." "But what if you leave?" his son gasped. The words shattered something in him. "I'm not going anywhere," he said fiercely. "I promise." His son clung to him until the sobs faded, until exhaustion replaced fear. When he finally slept, damp curls plastered to his forehead, he felt the weight of the promise settle into his bones. Promises were dangerous. The next morning, he called in sick to work and sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. It buzzed with emails, messages, obligations. He ignored them all. He thought about the counselor, about the woman, about the way his son's fear had surfaced despite everything he had done to prevent it. He realized, with a kind of quiet horror, that his greatest fear wasn't losing someone again. It was failing the person he had left. That afternoon, he knocked on the counselor's door. "I need help," he said. The words tasted strange, vulnerable, necessary. They talked for an hour about grief, about children who internalized loss, about how love didn't erase absence, it coexisted with it. The counselor spoke about support systems, about modeling vulnerability, about letting children see that adults also needed help sometimes. He nodded, absorbing every word like oxygen. When he left, he didn't feel fixed, but he felt less alone. That evening, as he tucked his son into bed, he said something new. "It's okay if you miss her," he said softly. "And it's okay if you're angry or sad or confused. You don't have to protect me from your feelings." His son stared at him. "I don't want to make you sad." "I'm already sad sometimes," he admitted. "And that's okay. We can be sad together." His son considered this, then scooted closer. "Will you tell her stories?" he asked. "About your mom?" He nodded. So he did. He told stories he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Stories that made his voice shake. Stories that made his son smile. They cried once, laughed once, sat in silence often. Later that night, he stepped out onto the balcony and realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. Being enough didn't mean being everything. It meant knowing when to reach out. And somewhere inside him, the fear shifted. Not gone, but named. And naming it gave him just enough courage to face what came next. He expected her to leave. That expectation had become instinct, a reflex, honed by years of watching people step back the moment things grew complicated. He had learned to recognize the signs, the softened voice, the careful distance, the unspoken calculation of whether someone else's pain was worth carrying. So when things began to unravel, when the careful balance of his life tipped and exposed its sharp edges, he waited for her absence the way one waits for bad weather. But she stayed. It began quietly. No declarations, no dramatic gestures, just presence. The day after his son's panic attack, she texted him for the first time. "I was thinking about him today, and about you." No need to reply. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. The message didn't demand anything. It didn't ask for reassurance or explanations. It simply existed, steady and unassuming. That unsettled him more than concern ever had. He didn't reply. Not because he didn't want to, but because replying felt like opening a door he wasn't ready to walk through. Over the next week, she appeared in the same places she always had: school events, the library, the hallway outside the counselor's office where she pretended to read flyers while his son sat inside with a therapist for the first time. She didn't ask questions when he came out, his face drawn and exhausted. She simply nodded and said, "You did the right thing." He scoffed lightly. "It doesn't feel like it." "It rarely does," she replied. That was the thing about her. She never contradicted his feelings. She didn't rush to reframe pain into something inspirational. She let it exist. One evening, as he packed up to leave the library, his son hesitated near the door. "Can she walk with us?" his son asked, glancing at her. He tensed. "It's cold." "I have a jacket," she said calmly. He looked at his son, saw the careful hope there, and felt his defenses waver. "Okay," he said. But just to the corner, they walked in a loose line, the city settling into dusk around them. His son talked animatedly about a story they were reading in therapy, how the character learned to breathe when things felt scary. She listened, asked thoughtful questions, praised his bravery without exaggeration. He watched from the side, hands shoved deep into his pockets, heart doing something uncomfortably like aching. At the corner, she stopped. "This is me." His son frowned. "Already?" "Already," she agreed. "But I'll see you soon. Promise?" She smiled softly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." The words struck him unexpectedly. They were honest, measured, responsible. That night after his son fell asleep, he finally replied to her message. "Thank you for not pushing." Her response came minutes later. "Thank you for letting me be here." Weeks passed. Things didn't magically improve. Therapy was hard. Some days his son came home lighter, others heavier. He learned to ride the unpredictability, to accept that progress wasn't linear. She remained constant. Sometimes she brought extra books she thought his son might like. Sometimes she just sat nearby while he worked, a quiet presence that asked nothing. On days when he was short-tempered and withdrawn, she didn't take it personally. On days when he apologized for being distant, she waved it off. "You're allowed to be human," she told him once. He laughed bitterly. "I don't feel very good at it." "No one is," she said. "We just keep trying." One evening, after his son had fallen asleep at her kitchen table during a homework session she'd offered to help with, he stood awkwardly by the door. "I should take him home," he said. "You can," she replied, "or you can let him sleep for 20 minutes and drink some tea." He hesitated. Old instincts screamed at him to leave, to retreat back into control and solitude. But he was tired in a way that went beyond sleep. "Okay," he said quietly. They sat across from each other, mugs warming their hands. "You don't owe me anything," she said suddenly. "I want you to know that." He looked up, startled. "I didn't think—" "I know," she said gently, but sometimes people assume kindness comes with strings. It doesn't. Not this." He swallowed. "Why are you doing this?" She considered him for a long moment. "Because I see you," she said, "and because I care about him. And because leaving when things get hard doesn't align with who I want to be." "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," she shrugged. "I'm not taking responsibility for your life. I'm just choosing not to run." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. That night, when he carried his son home, the city lights blurred slightly. Not from tears, he still didn't cry easily, but from something loosening inside his chest. The shift wasn't immediate. It didn't happen all at once. But slowly he began to let her into the harder moments. He admitted when he was overwhelmed, when he felt like he was failing, when he resented the ease of other families and hated himself for that resentment. She listened. Sometimes she offered perspective. Often she just listened. One night after a particularly rough therapy session, he snapped at his son over something small. The look on his son's face, hurt, confused, nearly broke him. He apologized immediately, but the damage lingered. Later, he told her about it, voice tight with shame. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "He deserves better." "He deserves a parent who apologizes," she replied. "That matters. I don't want him to remember me like this." "He won't remember perfection," she said softly. "He'll remember effort." The words stayed with him. The real test came the night he tried to push her away. It was after his son had a setback, another panic episode, another call from school. He felt raw, exposed, and dangerously close to breaking. "I can't do this," he told her, standing in the cold outside his apartment. "I don't want to drag you into this mess." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm already here." "That's the problem," he said. "You shouldn't be." She took a step closer. "Do you want me to leave?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The truth pressed against his ribs, sharp and terrifying. "No," he admitted. "Then stop deciding what's best for me," she said gently. "Let me decide." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "I'm not asking you to fix us," he said finally. "I don't even know what us is." "I'm not asking for answers," she replied. "Just honesty." He exhaled, long and shaky. "I'm scared," he said. I'm scared that if I let you in and something goes wrong, my son will get hurt again, and I won't survive that." She nodded. "That fear makes sense." "You're not afraid?" "I am," she admitted. "But fear doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we move carefully." For the first time, he didn't feel pressured to be brave. He felt allowed to be afraid. That night, when his son asked if she could come over for dinner again sometime, he didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. As he watched them together, his son animated, her attention fully engaged. He realized something profound. She wasn't replacing anyone. She wasn't filling a void. She was expanding the space. And in that space, for the first time in a long while, he felt the faint but undeniable pull of hope. Happiness didn't arrive all at once. There was no clear moment when he woke up and realized everything had changed, no dramatic line in the sand separating the man he had been from the man he was becoming. Instead, it came quietly, in fragments. Small decisions that felt insignificant on their own, but began to stack up day after day until they reshaped the life he thought he was trapped inside. It started with something simple. One morning, his son spilled cereal all over the kitchen floor before school. Milk pooled around his shoes, flakes crunching underfoot. Months ago, exhaustion would have snapped at him, sharp and immediate. That morning, he closed his eyes, took a breath, and laughed. "Well," he said, grabbing a towel, "that's one way to start the day." His son blinked, surprised. Then he laughed too. The sound stayed with him all day. He began noticing these moments, how different the air felt when he didn't brace himself for failure, how his body responded when he chose patience instead of control. He wasn't calmer because life was easier. He was calmer because he was no longer carrying everything by himself. She was there more often now, not as a guest, but not quite as something definable either. She didn't move in. She didn't rearrange their space. She respected the boundaries he still needed, the rhythms he had built for survival. But she showed up. Some evenings she helped with homework. Other nights she sat on the couch reading while he cooked, their presence weaving together without effort. She learned which foods his son avoided when he was anxious, which jokes landed, which didn't. She never corrected him in front of his son, never tried to assert authority that wasn't hers to claim. One night, after his son fell asleep, he watched her wash dishes at the sink, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. The scene was so ordinary it startled him. "This scares me," he admitted quietly. She turned, drying her hands. "Which part?" "All of it," he said honestly. "The fact that it feels good." She studied him. "You think good things are supposed to hurt?" "I think they always end." She nodded slowly. "Maybe, but ending doesn't erase what they were." He had no response to that. His son changed too. Not overnight, not dramatically, but the tightness in his shoulders eased. The pauses before answering questions grew shorter. Panic attacks still happened, but they came with tools now. Breathing exercises, words for fear, hands reaching out instead of pulling inward. One evening, his son sat between them on the couch, leaning comfortably against her side. "Dad," his son said, eyes still on the TV, "can she come to my school thing next week?" His heart skipped. She didn't react. She waited. "If you want her to," he said carefully. "I do." He looked at her. "Only if you want to." She smiled softly. "I'd love to." The school event was small and chaotic. Folding chairs, paper decorations, children performing songs with varying degrees of enthusiasm and accuracy. He sat in the front row, his son scanning the crowd nervously until he spotted both of them. When their eyes met, his son grinned. Later in the car, his son chattered nonstop about how she had clapped the loudest, how she laughed at the wrong parts of the song. "She was proud of me," his son said. "She should be," he replied. He realized then that pride didn't diminish when shared. It multiplied. The fear didn't vanish. It never fully did. There were nights he lay awake listening to his son breathe, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Moments when he caught himself preparing for loss out of habit. But now, when the fear rose, it didn't paralyze him. He talked about it. One night, sitting on the floor of the living room while his son slept, he said, "I'm afraid I'll mess this up." She leaned back against the couch. "You will." He flinched. "And then you'll apologize," she continued. "And you'll try again. That's not messing it up. That's being human." He laughed weakly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," she said. "It's just possible." He began letting himself imagine a future, not a fantasy, not a perfect picture, but a realistic one. A future with hard days and laughter, setbacks and celebrations. A future where his son didn't grow up thinking love was temporary or conditional. One night, as they cleaned up after dinner, his son looked between them. "Are you guys a team?" he asked. He froze, breath caught. She crouched slightly, meeting his son's eyes. "What do you think a team is?" "People who help each other," his son said, "and stay." She smiled. "Then yes, we're a team." His son nodded, satisfied. Okay. Later, after his son went to bed, he leaned against the counter, hands shaking. You didn't have to say that, he said. I know, she replied, but it's true. You're sure? She met his gaze. I'm here. That hasn't changed. The realization settled slowly but firmly. Accepting happiness wasn't about grand commitments or permanent guarantees. It was about choosing not to reject what was offered simply because it wasn't risk-free. It was about letting his son see him trust again. One afternoon, months later, they sat at the park, watching his son play. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying laughter and the distant sound of traffic. We're doing okay, he said. She smiled. You are? No, he's corrected. We are. She reached for his hand, not asking, just offering. This time he didn't hesitate. He squeezed back. For the first time since becoming a single father, he didn't feel like he was holding his breath, waiting for something to break. He felt grounded, present, happy, not because everything was perfect, but because he had finally stopped pushing happiness away. And in choosing that again and again, he built something real. In the end, nothing about his life looked the way he once imagined it would. There was no perfect structure, no clear blueprint, no guarantees written in ink. There was only a small apartment filled with laughter and mess, a child who slept more peacefully now, and a woman who chose to stay without being asked to promise forever. He learned that being a single dad didn't mean being incomplete. It meant being brave enough to show up every day, even when fear whispered that it would be safer to stay alone. He learned that strength wasn't silence, and love wasn't something you rationed to avoid pain. Love was something you practiced imperfectly, honestly, again and again. His son didn't need a flawless family. He needed one where feelings were named, where apologies were real, and where trust grew slowly but steadily. And somehow, by letting go of the idea that he had to be everything, he became exactly what his son needed. Happiness didn't erase the past. It made room for it without letting it define the future. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on the families we build. Not just the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose through courage, patience, and care. Share your thoughts, your experiences, or your own story of unexpected connection in the comments. Because sometimes the most meaningful love doesn't arrive loudly or perfectly.